We got breaking news here in HQ out of baseball, where the Philadelphia Phillies have fired manager Joe Girardi. The Phils are off to a 22-29 start this year, putting them 12 games behind the first place New York Mets. It comes after bookend of 2+ seasons in Philly for Girardi, with a record of 132-141 there and no postseason appearances. Bench coach Rob Thompson will take over remainder of the season. The Phillies releasing this statement as well. Of course, the announcement there with Girardi relieved of his duties as manager today. Bench coach Rob Thompson, as I mentioned, has been named interim manager for the club through the end of the 2022 season. In addition, coaching assistant Bobby Meacham also has been relieved of his duties there in Philadelphia. I want to bring in the host of Nothing Personal now, and always giving us that front office perspective, David Samson. And David, I mean, you hear this just coming moments ago that Girardi is shown the door there in the Phillies. Your reaction to this news coming out?
Well, this had to be the day they did it, because if they're trying to salvage the 2022 season, we're about at the end of the rope for the Phillies. They're 7 games under, about 10 games, 12 games back. And the interesting part about their release, I just want to point out, when we hired Joe Girardi in 2006 as a rookie manager, he demanded Bobby Meacham, Mike Harkey, and Gary Tuck. It was non-negotiable. We had to hire those coaches. As he's gone on in his career, you've seen who he's brought with him. It's interesting that Bobby Meacham was also fired along with Joe Girardi. At the end of the day, the Phillies have been underperforming, and John Middleton is not willing to blame Dave Dombrowski. He's not willing to blame his signings. He feels like he shored up his offense, and Dave Dombrowski's good at that without caring about defense. But at the end of the day, their roster's just not good enough. But you got to take out somebody. You take out Joe Girardi. My guess is the Phillies will not perform better under Rob Thompson than they did under Girardi, because they're simply not a good enough team. But they've got to try something, and so they did.
6-14 in their division, by the way, just 3-7 their last 10. And you kind of touched on it there, Girardi kind of losing the hang of things there. Was it him not having control of this team, roster management? What was the final nail in the coffin from there in Philly?
So when you blow a bunch of games late and you get walked off a few times in a row, and then you have Bryce Harper saying this is just too hard to take, it reminds me of so many of my years with the Marlins, when you've got a closer who's not working out, you're losing tough games, you're not getting clutch hits, just things seem to just not be good, so you've got to change the voice. And Joe Girardi is a very strong voice, and he likes things done his way, period. There is no other way. He doesn't want to be interrupted by the front office. He doesn't want suggestions with his lineup. He doesn't want anything other than what he wants. And when you're winning, that works. When you're losing, that's the end. Remember, he was on the last year of his contract. The Phillies had not given him an extension, so he was sort of a lame duck. And for me, this was a long time coming. They were never going to renew him short of a long roll through October. But the way they started, it was a fait accompli.
See the numbers there not stacking up for the expectations. And you mentioned, of course, not wasting a year on Bryce Harper. Look, we are getting close to that trade deadline, August 2nd. Are we going to start to see a fire sale here, maybe a rebuild instantly now that this move has been made in Philly?
No, I think that John Middleton, the owner, is not willing to do a rebuild. He's not willing to do anything, but he's also not going to take on money. He's right up against the luxury tax threshold. And we always would say to our players, hey, help us help you. Do something that makes us want to add to this team. Show us that you can possibly win some games and get back in this race. So if the Phillies go on a bit of a run and they get back to 500, because that's the first step, you've got to get back to 500, I can see John Middleton allowing for an addition by the August 2nd trade deadline. But they're not going to fire sale. They're not going to trade away their guys. They're in bed with them. They've signed them to long-term deals. They have who they have. But if the Phillies don't improve in the next month, there definitely will not be an ad at the deadline.
As we mentioned, 12 games back of the lead there with the Mets there. On the flip side, Joe Girardi, what's next for him? Will we see him back in a dugout anytime soon? Your expectations there for him?
So it's interesting. Remember, he had that 10-hour interview with Theo Epstein and wondering about the Cubs job. For me, Joe Girardi should not manage again, because he just does not work well with the way baseball is now. He doesn't work well with front offices. He really does an us against them mentality. That's what he did in 2006 inside our young clubhouse. He made a huge divide between the front office and the players, and these days you cannot have that divide. You will see Joe Girardi again. You'll see him on a TV screen near you. He's going to get a job relatively quickly as some sort of analyst commentator on probably MLB Network, one of the networks, maybe even CBS. You never know. But he will not be back in the dugout anytime soon.
All right, David Samson is always breaking it down for us here on CBS Sports HQ. You can catch him always, the host of Nothing Personal, David Samson. I'm pretty sure this will be the talk of the day on the latest pod there. Joe Girardi no longer part of the Phillies, the organization there parting ways with him. You can download and give David a follow. On that breaking news here in HQ with the Philadelphia Phillies firing manager Joe Girardi today. The Phillies off to a 22-29 start this season, with them 12 games back of the first place Mets there in that division. It closed the book on 2+ seasons in Philly for Girardi, who, by the way, the record just 132-141 with no postseason experience or appearances there so far in Philly. So bench coach Rob Thompson will take over. The team releasing a statement today on their actions. Of course, the Phillies at home tonight against the Angels, but here it is. The Phillies have relieved Joe Girardi of his duties as manager today. Bench coach Rob Thompson has been named interim manager for the club through the end of the 2022 season. In addition, coaching assistant Bobby Meacham also relieved of his duties there with the Phillies. Join us now, Jim Bowden. And Jim, this has been a topic talked about the last couple of weeks when it comes to Phillies. Based on what we're seeing on the field, your reaction to this coming down today?
Well, I expected Dave was going to make a change. I think he had to. Look, this is not a good Philadelphia Phillies team. It's not a good defensive team. They don't have a good bullpen. I did not have them as a playoff team on opening day, but I did think they could win more than they lose. I thought they could go 82-80. They're 7 games under 500, and the worst part of their performance is they're not hitting. They're not producing runs, and that's supposed to be the strength of the team and should be. And the other thing is Joe Girardi really did not relate with the players very well, not a motivator. And so that interpersonal skill that you need today wasn't working, and he didn't really work well with the front office either. So, look, I saw this change coming. Dave Dombrowski promoting bench coach Rob Thompson for that position here for the rest of the year. And then we'll see what happens in the offseason. But he's going to get a shot to try to turn this team around. But look, they're better than 7 games under 500. We're not going to be covering them in October, but it's been very disappointing. And sometimes, look, I fired a lot of managers in my career, and a lot of times it wasn't because they weren't a quality manager, but they just didn't work with that team, and a different voice was needed. And there was no doubt in Philadelphia a different voice was needed, and so the change by Dave Dombrowski and the Phillies today.
You see that highest payroll there, 4th. You look at the teams above them, the Mets, Dodgers, the Yankees. They're all above 500 and definitely in the playoff picture if it started today, but the Phillies there at 233. By the way, in the month of May, just 10 wins. You mentioned maybe a change of a voice here with Girardi now out the door. Can we see them trend upwards, maybe with Rob Thompson there taking over, or is this maybe a wash of a year for the Phillies?
No, I think it's a watch for the year, but I didn't like their team, as I said, out of spring training. So I didn't have expectations for them outside of winning more than they lost. And I expected a lot more offensively. But you can't be below average defensively at every position except catcher and expect to make the playoffs. It just doesn't happen. So the front office has a lot of work to do ahead of them to make this a winning team. They're not going to be able to do it at the trade deadline. It's something they have to do in the offseason. But I will say this. I think going forward, Brandon, they need to have a manager that's going to work with this generation of players. And I think when you look at a formula that's working extremely well, let's point to 3 managers in the American League. Alex Cora of the Red Sox, Aaron Boone of the New York Yankees, and A.J. Hinch of the Detroit Tigers. All 3 of them spent some time in the media. All 3 of them are people. Great people skills. They know how to motivate players. They know how to relate to players at so many levels. They understand today's analytics, and they don't just go along with it. They embrace it, and they use it. But it's the human interaction that's special. There's a guy right now working for the MLB Network television that would be perfect in Philadelphia, and that is Mark DeRosa. And if I were Dave Dombrowski, that would be the guy that I would be targeting right now. I believe that DeRosa, who studies this game every single day, as much as anybody that's covering the sport or is even in the sport, and I think he would have a chance to do what Alex Cora, Aaron Boone, and A.J. Hinch are doing. I think he would be the right manager for the Phillies. He understands players. He can relate to today's game. He understands the technology that's being used to win. And I think that's the kind of hire they need. They need somebody that understands not only what baseball is today, but what it's going to be over the next 3 or 4 years from a technological and analytic perspective, as well as having that old school background and experience, which he certainly had as a player and is showing that off in his role right now at MLB TV.
Jim, I want to take a look at the standings right now in that division. Of course, you mentioned maybe the change of voice can change some things, but when you look at it, of course, sitting third and just 6 wins so far under Girardi there, if they do have a change of voice, if you look at the Mets and what they're doing in the division, 35 wins, and right above them you have, or below them you have the Braves as well at 25. If there is a change of voice, can they get in that top tier, maybe 1 or 2 in the NL East in the future?
No, there's no way. Look, the Atlanta Braves are the most underachieving team right now in that division, and they just haven't hit as a team yet. They're going to hit. They're going to put it together. So I see the Mets and the Braves separating themselves, and I think the Phillies have to be concerned about the Marlins as well. But they certainly can play better than 7 games under 500, and I think that's the point that we're all trying to make here. Does a change in manager mean more wins? I don't think it's going to be significant, because there's too many problems with the actual team. And I think they're going to be a fascinating team at the deadline, because, it might make sense to move some of that proven payroll. It might make sense to get younger. They don't have a very strong farm system at this point. They do have a couple of pitchers coming, but they're a couple of years away. It's going to be very interesting to see what Dave does. But in the meantime, I think this had to happen in Philadelphia. I'm surprised it took this long for Dave to pull the trigger. I know he hates to make managerial changes. He wasn't used to doing that when he was with Jim Leyland, and so this is difficult for him. He had a good friendship with Joe, but this is a professional decision that had to be made.
All right, Joe Girardi out the door there. That breaking news, and Jim Bowden breaking it all down for us, giving that front office perspective based on what we've seen so far in the field. Appreciate it as always, JB, on that breaking news there with Girardi out the door for the Phillies. Taking a look at what he's done so far. You look at the season so far, not so good. Third in that division in 2020, then second in 21, and then as you see here, the final nail in the coffin, just 22 wins to show for. Unders, not so bad, but third in that division when you have guys like the Mets and the Braves trending on maybe somewhat subpar years on the Phillies. Not what you want to see from Joe Girardi, not what you're expecting. Of course, no appearances in the postseason. A lot of things underneath that. Bryce Harper kind of wasting seasons under him, and that 4th highest payroll when it comes to MLB.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.